Did you happen to see the dark and foreboding clouds on Wednesday night coming in across Green Bay around 6 o'clock? I think a lot of you saw that scene. Remarkable clouds. Whoa. Scary looking things. Memorable skies. They were saying that we might have gotten dime-sized hail to go along with really high winds and torrential rain. Thankfully, we didn't get the hail, at least not that I heard about, and the winds weren't damaging, as far as I know. And the rain was heavy, but it was really rather brief. But it was an amazing sight on the western horizon. Do you think about God when a storm front like that comes? How about when the rains fall or there's hail in the forecast? You think about God? Does snow help you think about God? What about thunder? Lightning? I read the Old Testament book of Job again this past week. After chapters 1 and 2, I slogged along through the next 30 chapters, eagerly awaiting chapter 32, but looking forward especially to chapters 38 and following. I've read the book of Job many times before, so I knew it was coming, and that's why I could look ahead to 32 and really eager for 38. The best words in the whole 42 chapters come from God's mouth in chapters 38 through the end. What we read there encourages the heart. It builds the faith. It stops the mouth. Even as Job admits in chapter 40, verse 4, "Behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth." Here's a piece of Bible reading advice. I think it could be helpful to you. When you come to the book of Job, and if you're using the Discipleship Journal Bible reading plan, you don't get to the book of Job until the end of the year. But if you're looking for somewhere to read and you think, well, Pastor mentioned that, maybe I should look at Job. Well, when you get to the book of Job, be sure you get to chapter 32, and especially to chapter 38. I said just now that I slog along through 3/4 of the book. It's true. I acknowledge that. I admit that. And I suspect a number of people abandon Job somewhere in the middle of the debates between Job and his 3 friends that take up the majority of the book. They're hard to follow. They're confusing. The 3 friends and Job too say some good things that are true, but they also spout some very bad theology, and they say some things that are not true. So I'm not suggesting you take the easy way out, because laboring in the Word of God is always worth the effort. It's always worth the work. But I advise you, when you come to Job, read the first 2 chapters very thoughtfully. Play the movie in your mind as you're reading the story. Interact with it personally. Read those first 2 chapters very thoughtfully, and then go pretty fast through the next 30 chapters. You can always go back and read some more, and if you read it a time or 2 a year, you'll come be more and more familiar with what's in there and be able to get the gold that's there among some of the sand and silt. But go fast through the 30 chapters between verse 3 and between chapter 3 and chapter 31. And then take your time soaking in the last quarter of the book from chapters 32 to 42. For sure, there are some really great lines, wonderful truths in the course of the debates between Job and his friends. And there are some funny things. And if even in those conversations you try to imagine expressions or indignation or surprise, it probably helps in the reading. But you get this from Job to his once compassionate friends who became harsh critics. No doubt you are the people, and wisdom will die with you. That's just a funny line, Yeah, so you know it all. You've got it all, and when you die, nobody will know anything else. That's what is the sense there. And you get that in the middle of these conversations that maybe can be so confusing. We hear the hopeful, confident words from a hurting, broken man. I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last, he will stand upon the earth. That's chapter 19, verse 25. We hear him tell the truth when he says, of God, in his hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind. That's true. That's true. And the more times you read Job and the more you read the Bible, the more familiar you become with the good stuff that's true. And the better you're equipped to recognize the statements that are off base. Most of us know something about Job, don't we? I mean, there's an expression, he's got the patience of Job. Even people who don't know the Bible or read the Bible have maybe heard of Job. He has suffered horribly for months with open sores all over his body. He sits on the ash heap outside his town, an object of scorn and ridicule, even from young children. And this after losing almost everything. His wealth is gone. His oxen and donkeys and sheep and camels, all gone. And his family, his 7 sons, his 3 daughters, all killed on the same day by a catastrophic wind that collapsed the house where they were feasting. And Job wonders, very naturally, what has happened? He doubts God's purposes. His confidence in God wavers, and he complains to God about his condition. By the way, and this is also a Bible reading tip, and it's also, I'm putting it out there so you know where I come down on this. Job was a real man. Job was a historical figure. I believe that, and I think the Bible supports that. He was not a legend or a myth. There are preachers in this town, more than just a couple, who don't believe Job really lived and that the story is just a biblical fable. They really believe that. James, in his New Testament letter, commends Job for steadfast patience and faith, and James affirms the mercy and compassion of the Lord. At the same time, same sentence, same breath, same verse. And I mention this because there is that belief among many that Job was not a historical figure. It's hard for me to imagine that James would urge people to look to a fable for their encouragement. Maybe you have heard it said Job wasn't a real historical person. I want you to know that I think he was, and I believe the Bible affirms that. In chapter 32, we hear from Elihu, a young man who's been sitting and listening to all the bluster from Job and from his 3 friends who were trying to set Job straight. This younger man speaks much truth and brings his counsel to a close as a storm brews around them. Think of Wednesday night. A ferocious wind howls. And by the time he was done, I imagine it looked and felt something like we saw and felt this past week. And God begins to speak in chapter 38, where we read, "The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind." So maybe you'll turn your Bible to Job 38. If you use a worship Bible, go to page 562. I'm going to read a few verses here, and then we're going to go to a couple other places in the Old Testament and finish with some words from Revelation. Job 38, as God reminds Job of who he is and what he has done and what he can do, he says this about things that we know something about. Verse 22 of Job 38. This is God talking. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? What is the way to the place where the light is distributed, or where the east wind is scattered upon the earth? Who has cleft a channel for the torrents of rain, and a way for the thunderbolt to bring rain on a land where no man is, on the desert on which there is no man, to satisfy the waste and desolate land, and to make the ground sprout with grass? Has the rain a father, or who has begotten the drops of dew? From whose womb did the ice come forth? And who has given birth to the frost of heaven? The waters become hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. In all these rhetorical questions, God makes statements about himself. And he makes statements about Job. He makes statements about us. God says, don't think too highly of yourself. And he says, you can't think highly enough about me. For a few minutes this morning, let's think a bit more about verses 22 and 23. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? Do you remember anywhere in the Bible something about hail and the destruction caused by hail? If you've been reading the Bible this year, if you're following a Bible reading plan, you've probably read Exodus. Do you remember what happened there? The part about the Israelites in Egypt and the 10 plagues and the 7th plague? Hail. Destructive, deadly hail all over the land of Egypt, except in the areas where the Israelites lived. We read about that in Exodus 9. God promised very heavy hail to fall, such as never has been in Egypt from the day it was founded until now. And God made a way of escape, even for Pharaoh and the Egyptians. As Moses said to Pharaoh, now, therefore, get your livestock and all that you have in the field into safe shelter. For every man and beast that is in the field and is not brought home will die when the hail falls on them. Exodus 9 says this, and maybe you'd want to follow along. Exodus 9, verses 22 and following. Here's what happened. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, so that there may be hail in all the land of Egypt, on man and beast and every plant of the field in the land of Egypt. Then Moses stretched out his staff toward heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and fire ran down to the earth. And the Lord rained hail upon the land of Egypt. There was hail and fire flashing continually in the midst of the hail, very heavy hail, such as never had been seen, such as had never been in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. The hail struck down everything that was in the field, in all the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And the hail struck down every plant of the field and broke every tree of the field. Only in the land of Goshen, where the people of Israel were, was there no hail. Destructive, deadly hail all over the land of Egypt, except in the area where the Israelites lived. Try to imagine that. Maybe I can help. Imagine the Israelites living in Wisconsin, in Shawano County. A hailstorm comes and wipes out everything outside. All the crops in the orchards, the Holsteins, the help, the harvesters. Everywhere in Dorr and Kewaunee and Brown County and in Oconto and Marinette and Outagamie and Wapaka counties too. And everywhere else all around, from Wausau to Rhinelander and Ashland to La Crosse and Eau Claire and Madison and Milwaukee and Sheboygan, everywhere else. No more crops, no more orchards. Anybody outside? Dead. But everything's fine in Shawano County. What would you say about that? How does that happen? But that's Exodus 9. Who's in control of the hail? The Lord said to Job, "Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war?" The plague of hail may have been the first time God rained down heavy hail on his enemies, but it was not the last time. And if you read the Old Testament and look at the history of Israel, you might remember this from the book of Joshua. Most of us are somewhat familiar with the Battle of Jericho, because Joshua fit the Battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. You might recall when the Israelites were settling the promised land, and the word came to Joshua that a neighboring city that they were duty-bound to help and protect was being threatened. In Joshua 10, we read that Joshua and the army of Israel went to fight against 5 kings and their armies. Verse 8 of Joshua 10 says, "The Lord said to Joshua, 'Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not a man of them shall stand before you.'" Verse 10 says, "The army of Israel struck them with a great blow and chased them and struck them. And as they fled before Israel," verse 11 tells us, "the Lord threw down large stones from heaven on them, and they died. There were more who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with the sword." I know, skeptics will go, how does that happen? Well, if you believe the Bible, you remember the Lord said to Job, "Have you seen the storehouses of hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war?" Joshua 10 was not the first time God rained down heavy hail on his enemies, and it was not the last time either. Time doesn't permit me to take us to God's delivering Jerusalem from the Assyrian king Sennacherib. But let me just say briefly, given what we read in Isaiah in chapters 30 and 31, it seems likely, certainly plausible, that God rained hail down on Sennacherib's army when he sent an angel to the army camp and killed 185,000 of the enemy in one night. God sent an angel and killed 185,000 of the Assyrian army. In Isaiah 30, verse 30, we read about the Assyrians and their relationship with God's people and God himself. Isaiah 30:30 says, "And the Lord will cause his majestic voice to be heard, and the descending blow of his arm to be seen in furious anger and a flame of devouring fire, with a cloudburst and storm and hailstones. The Assyrians will be terror-stricken at the voice of the Lord when he strikes with his rod." And the next chapter, Isaiah 31, verse 8 says, "And the Assyrians shall fall by a sword, not of man, and a sword not of man shall devour him." The Lord said to Job, "Have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war?" There's one more place to which we go. Another place in the Bible where we read about hail and God's enemies. In the Revelation of John, the last book of the Bible, in chapter 16, we see that in a fearsome, terrible day of the Lord, great hailstones, about 100 pounds each, fell from heaven on people. And they cursed God for the plague of the hail, because the plague was so severe. You ever been out in the hail? If it's small, you just have to do it. You got to go out there sometime if it's small. Just experience it. Pea-sized hail stings. Golf ball-sized hail, don't go outside. Destroys roofs. Baseball-sized hail goes through car windshields. 100-pound hailstones? Can you imagine? I hope we don't have hailstorms this summer. I really hope it doesn't hail in Door County until the end of harvest. But when you see the hail on the ground, or hear it on the roof, or next time a storm builds and the skies darken, or when you read Exodus 9 or Joshua 10 or Revelation 16, think about this. Think about what God said to Job. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? And remember three things. God does what no one else can do. Just look around on a day like this, not just a night like Wednesday or the thunder of last Sunday night. God does what no one else can do. And hail is a vivid reminder that God is powerful. Hail is a vivid reminder that God is able to do amazing things. And when we read from the Bible what God did with the hail, we should be astonished and amazed. We cannot do anything about hail or wind or snow or rain or drought or lightning. But God controls what He has created. And even when His creation brings us trouble, He is still in control. That's not just my opinion. That's the Bible truth. He is still in control. God does what no one else can do. Secondly, God is worthy of our humble and our heartfelt submission and adoration. Bow your head. Lift your hands. God is worthy of our humble submission, our heartfelt adoration. Hail is a reminder to us to bow in reverent fear and glad-hearted submission, and to throw ourselves on the mercy of God and seek to escape punishment and judgment, and to remember who God is, and that God is God and we are not. When we remember who God is and what He can do, we say with Job, though He slay me, I will hope in Him. That's Job 13:15. We echo the words of that righteous man, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gives, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And finally, God is able to do all that He has promised, and even more than we can imagine. That's what we should think about when we see the signs all around us, and when we hear the hail on the roof, when we see it in the yard. God is able to do all that He has promised, and even more than we can imagine. Think of it. The one who is able to preserve the people and the crops and the herds in one area while destroying everything all around, Exodus 9, and the one who kills more of His enemies with hailstones from the heavens than an army does with conventional weapons, Joshua 10. This one can do whatever He has promised. And He will do whatever He has purposed. He will. He will keep His word. And He reveals new mercies every morning. He will not leave His people or forsake them. He will forgive sins. He will remember them no more. He will not let anything separate His people from Himself. He can be trusted. Be still and know that He is God. And that is for His glory, and